Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this, our sixth week of consumer market research. I hope the last week wasn't too painful. Doing your projects and all, I've read several of them over, and the ones that I read were pretty good. So I look forward to getting some more. This marks our second week talking about quantitative research. The theme of this week is going to be questionnaire design, designing an effective survey instrument. The questionnaire is to quantitative research, what the discussion guide is to qualitative research. I did want to make a point about the discussions last week regarding sample size. There seemed to be a recurring theme, and I just want to address this issue. When you're considering your sample size and you're looking at your margin of error is 100% a function of, well, your confidence level. So assume that's 95%, right? It is then 100% a function of the size of your sample. And that is independent of the size of the total population. So in other words, if you're talking to 100 people or 200 people, and your population is 5,000 people, or your population is 300 million people, you're going to get the same margin of error talking to 100 people, regardless of what your population size is. Okay, so email me if you're still not clear on that concept. So let's move on to questionnaire design, which I think is a lot more interesting than sampling. The book gives a good suggestion when you're starting to write a questionnaire. Consider your objectives. If you have a proposal, maybe you're a market research supplier, or maybe you're the client and you've developed a proposal, you have specific questions that you want to answer quantitatively, review that, because what you want to do is make sure that in the body of your questionnaire, all of your questions are going to be answered. Now, I've asked in the past, when do you do qualitative? When do you want to do quantitative is the flip side of that question. You do quantitative research when you want to measure things. And there are many kinds of quantitative survey. The book talks about some of them. It doesn't talk about some of the more common ones, and I'd like to do that here. I think the most common, certainly with my company, the most common type of survey that we do is known as an A&U. And I've heard it defined as awareness and usage, and I've also heard it defined as attitude and usage. I've also seen it as AAU, for attitude, awareness, and usage study. And that is when often done in a tracking study. A tracking study, like a brand tracker study, is when you want to compare the results pertaining to your brand over time. So you might do it every year, and it looks at key measures like how many people are aware of your brand, and how many people use your brand or a specific product within your brand, and how do they feel about the brand. That's the attitude part, and we'll get into that in a minute. The book divides questionnaire components into kind of three areas: one behavioral, one attitudinal, and then the other is, I think they call it compositional, getting some background data on your target audience. So an A&U is a very, very common type of survey, and it generally it will begin with a question like what is called unaided awareness. In other words, I'm not going to mention any brands to you. When you think of coffee shops, what companies come to mind? And what I'm gauging here is unaided awareness. And within unaided awareness, there are two different measures. One is called top of mind. That's the first answer people give you. If somebody, for instance, what's your favorite coffee shop? I can measure the number of people that say Starbucks, for instance, first. And then what I do is I begin to probe, and I say, any others come to mind? Well, there's Caribou. Well, there's Pete's. And those are under the heading of total unaided awareness. Then I have another measure, which is aided awareness. And then I say, have you ever heard of Caribou Coffee? Have you ever heard of Dunkin' Donuts? And I measure, at the back end, when I'm analyzing, the number of people that are aware of Dunkin' Donuts when it's aided. So I've got three measures that can help me understand, for instance, the health of my brand over time. One is the first mention, or top of mind. One is total aided awareness. And then total awareness, which includes aided awareness. But there are lots of kinds of quantitative studies. Customer satisfaction studies are a great example. The book talks about conjoint analysis and different types of techniques when you're like max differentiation, when you're looking to test and understand what's important to people when choosing a product. And it can help you to design the ideal product by doing trade-offs. You give people a list of attributes, and let's say one is $1 cup of coffee that's from Brazil in a grande cup, and then the other is $1.20, and maybe it's from Ethiopia and it's in a venti cup. Are you willing to pay the extra 20 cents for those attributes? So read about that in the book. I think it does a pretty good job of explaining things. The book talks about the difference between open-ended and closed-ended questions. Now, generally in a survey, all of your questions, or most of your questions, are going to be closed-ended. And there's a reason for that. It makes for a very clear instrument for very clear questioning, but it also helps you on the back end when you're doing your analysis. What you often do when you're developing answers to questions is you pre-code responses so that the person that is doing the interviewing can check when the respondent starts going off in their own words about something. They say, oh, okay, he's talking about price, so he can check price. Or he's talking about quality is most important, so he can check quality. But those are all closed-ended questions, as opposed to an open-ended question where you're looking to get somebody's thoughts on whatever in their own words. And if you're doing the interviewing, you've got to be very careful to capture word for word what the person is saying. Now, open-endeds can be coded on the back end. In other words, an analyst can read the responses and then decide, well, I see a bunch of groupings here. There's certain people seem to be either talking about price, or they're talking about quality, or they're talking about customer service. And then there's some oddball responses that I'm going to call other. So you can do coding. You can do coding on the back end. But you might also be interested in getting some examples of quotes in people's own words. But you want to limit the number of open-ended questions that you ask. When we do a quantitative proposal, for instance, we generally limit it. And we'll say that it's going to be a 20-minute interview, and you'll be limited to 2, maybe 3 open-ended questions, generally 2. They're more expensive because of the additional coding and analysis required on the back end.